My research is on Chinese Malaysians' role in Malaysia and their challenge and solutions. So let me share an article written by Chinese Malaysians called Chan Hao. In his article, he utilized several keywords to describe the role of Chinese Malaysian in Malaysia's society. The first one is awkward. Chan Hao says that when he just arrived in China, people always ask him that why do you speak Chinese so well when they first meet. He was surprised because he and lots of Chinese Malaysians remain receiving education in Chinese and inherited the Chinese culture, but the Chinese people already consider them as foreigners. The second one is isolated. Chan Hao claimed that Chinese Malaysians have obvious difference with the other races in Malaysia. Different appearance and language gradually increase the gap between the Chinese Malaysian and the other races. And the Chinese Malaysian felt that they either belong to Malaysia or China. The challenge for Chinese Malaysian is that the native Malaysian consider the Chinese Malaysian as a of the outsider because the Chinese Malaysian dominated the Malaysian's economic through an examination of variety sociological factors and analytical analysis suggests that the racial conflict between the Chinese Malaysians and native Malaysians due to the economic inequalities and cultural identities require the cooperation of the two races in order to flourishing the all Malaysian citizens. From communitarian perspective, as Chinese Malaysian, in one hand, they are culturally Chinese and remain the same tradition as the Chinese people, but on the other hand, they are both born in Malaysia and legally as Malaysians. When the racial conflicts happen, the Chinese Malaysian get into a dilemma of loyalty. If they consider themselves as Malaysian, their morality do not allow them to fight against each other as brothers and sisters. If they consider themselves as Chinese, they can fight for fairness and righteousness. As a matter of fact, almost 50% of the young Chinese Malaysians say that they feel racial discrimination in their country, and in the survey shows that 70% of the Malaysians never feel that they have been treated unfairly due to their race, but only 45% of the Chinese Malaysians feel the same way. So at this point, instead of choosing break up the relationship with the local Malaysian, the Chinese Malaysians should try their best to cooperate with the Malaysian and solve the problems. Indeed, the Chinese Malaysian have the responsibility to protect the solidarity of the country. Furthermore, solving the racial issues is the only way to eliminate the racial conflict in Malaysia. Meanwhile, it brings peace and improvement to both of the races. For the Chinese Malaysian, a good relationship with the native Malaysians can help them gain support from the Malay government so that they are able to start more further development. For the native Malaysian, the Chinese Malaysian can help them fit in an economic aspect, and they can learn skills of doing business. In this way, the two races can benefit each other, and a solid community is formed. All in all, to eliminate the racial discrimination, either the native Malaysian or the Chinese Malaysian cannot treat each other with unfairness or injustice. Both of the two races need to have a tolerance attitude towards each other and should work together as a united community regardless of people and racial identities. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, question for Julie.
So the specific problem, are you focusing on like the unequal treatment between the two nationalities? Is that the problem?
Yeah. Like the Chinese people think they receive the racial discrimination from the Malay governments, and they cannot get like the equal rights with the local Malaysian. Yeah.
So what you mentioned they should solve the problem by kind of equalizing the race. Do you have ideas on how they can, what they can do to start fixing the problem?
I think like first of all they need to like accept the difference between the two races and don't think like we are different, like you come from China and you don't belong to Malaysia, but the local Malaysians should like accept them and like don't limit their rights, like participate in like governing the country, like give more rights to the Chinese, and the Chinese will help them with the economic, like,
How exactly would Chinese Malaysians help the local Malaysians economically? What are some practical steps or things they can do?
Maybe they can set up some business together and bring like the Chinese, like the wealthy Chinese can donate some money to the poor Malaysian, help them.
So they need to be more active, that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So on both sides, on Chinese Malaysians, they need to be more active, they need to participate, they need to contribute to the Malaysians' well-being.
Yeah.
And then the local Malaysians then will have a change of attitude.
Yeah.
But government, you argue that government should also do something.
Yeah, actually the Malaysian people are very friendly to Chinese Malaysian, but the government like afraid the Chinese Malaysian like would take over the power of the government.
So policy-wise.
Yeah, policies. Yeah.
Other questions?
I'm just wondering what brings so many Chinese to Malaysia?
Because when the British people colonized Malaysia, they need more labor to work for the factories, so they bring lots of Chinese people to there. Yeah,
So
the Chinese people also like go there to find jobs and working there.
So it's been a problem for a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
Anything else? I'm going to go ahead and just make some comments about this, and maybe you can record the comments if you like. Well, first of all, I still need to hear clearly about your thesis statement. Right? What is that you're arguing? You're saying that, look, my paper is really about the inequality that I see in Malaysia between the local Malaysians and Chinese Malaysians. And you can argue about the identity of the Chinese Malaysians are fundamentally Malaysians, right? Because they live there, they were born there, they live there, that's all they know. And you say that, but at the same time you argue that there ought to be some overall efforts from both the Chinese Malaysian side as well as the local Malaysian side to bridge the gap, and you argue that there are some fundamental steps to make that happen for Chinese and Malaysians. These kind of economic assistance, sharing of the wealth, participate more actively in the community building efforts with Malaysian people is local Malaysian people is very important. On the other side, Malaysian government, there ought to be some effort, policy effort to make that happen. Right? So you have to really come across and say that this is really what your paper is about. Okay? You also need to give a more clear sense of what. Well, first of all, I want to go to the positive. I think it's really good that you start out with this person's writing about his feeling. Like you say, awkward. The word comes out to be awkward. So you talk about why that is, and you say there's another word that he uses was isolated. And then out of that, you talk about language, talk about belonging, talk about being outsider, talk about, and you use that as a hook to bring us into the literature review. That was really good. you want to be more clear, but I think that was a great start. One area you had to improve on is framework. What I hear was a communitarian framework. I didn't hear about other ones.
Yeah, I like before I thought like I need to choose the most most useful one, so I didn't get like.
I think you need to give judges a taste of how you use different ones. Especially the judges are going to ask, well, how do you apply faith, for example? Whether you're a Christian or not, we do ask our students to use a biblical themes that are found in Bible as a way to think about problems. Okay, so in this case, you could utilize this the theme of a community or some sort, or a restoration theme of restoration. So obviously, there's a brokenness between different people. Right? How do we bridge the gap? Right? You can use a theme to talk about that. Be sure that every time you use a framework, there ought to be some way of thinking about solutions. And I think that's what Emily was pushing you to provide some examples. And that needs to come out in the actual presentation.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Good.